So I spent some time earlier this week feeling around for a bump that I was pretty sure should be on my head. And it turns out I can't find it anymore. But there used to be, for years and years, a little hard lump that helped me remember a day with my brother and a set of blocks. And I think they were probably the youngest brother's blocks. We were old enough that wooden blocks were not our normal playthings. But for some reason, there we were. There's about 2 years between us. And I was old enough, I don't know if it was third, fourth grade, old enough to have some sense of the world and some self-restraint. And I don't know what happened. I don't know if gravity was just so maddening to this brother that was trying to build, the bigger one that was also an elementary schooler. I don't know if the world was just rough that day. I don't know if perhaps his darling sister could have done something to anger him. I have no memory of anything that occasioned this, but suddenly there was a block sailing at my head at full speed and somehow just happened to hit the corner just right, I mean, it wasn't that far away, and ooh, it hurt. And I was ready to throw one back. I'm not usually the kind to express my anger physically, but this was instinctive. I had the material at hand. I knew that I was going to give as good as I got, and my hand is up here ready to do the deed. And I didn't. I'd love to say it's because I knew that my brother wasn't aiming at me when he threw it. But that's not why I did it, though it's probably true. I would love to say that I didn't throw it because I was older and I was able to tell that my younger brother has significant challenges, particularly as a child, with executive function and impulse control and dealing with feelings. And so there is a way that he could not help himself the way I could help myself. I'd love to say that's why I didn't throw the block, but that's not why. I'd love to say I didn't throw the block because I knew I'd be in trouble. That even would be a nice sense of at least some responsibility. But no, my arm is back, my mouth is already throwing angry words. My poor mother is trying to teach a piano lesson in the other room. And the only thing that stopped me from chucking that as hard as I could, and I don't have a big arm, but we're only 4 feet apart, is the look of terror in his eyes. For a moment, I felt quite powerful. And then I realized it was not a look of terror because of my great malevolence and he had learned his lesson. He does not do well with blood. And that block had taken a little chunk out of my scalp, and I had a nice gusher coming down because scalps bleed. And I was in some pain, but I was really more interested in extracting my revenge than on noticing that I was bleeding rather profusely. And this poor kid, who does not do well with blood, seems, probably thought he had killed his sister and was just utterly terrified. And that finally got through to me enough that I set the block down and thought, maybe there's something else we need to be doing right now. And got trooped off to the friend who is a nurse who said, no stitches are needed. And all that was left was his memory of this going terribly south and a little bump. Kindness and mercy. We like to give as good as we get, don't we? Jesus, this is not easy what you are asking. We like to give as good as we get. And have you noticed that give as good as we get very quickly turns into give a little more maybe than we got? Just to kind of really teach a lesson. That's how we operate so often. In the Torah, in the law God gave to Moses, there is this line, an eye for an eye, and we take that as some sort of promise of what we are owed. When in fact, it's saying, scale it back. You go kill people for a slight. God's people are going to operate differently. We're not going to be out of control. But we say, we're entitled to, when what God was doing there was something completely different, right? And if it was just a matter of not hitting back, maybe we can manage that. Some of us, it's easy to keep our hands behind our back and not hit. But mercy and kindness and forgiveness have a lot more to ask of us than just putting our hands behind our back, right? Love your enemies. Oh no, Jesus. I might be willing not to hit, but I would like to retain my right to hate them. I would like to retain my right to call them names on the internet. We are good at that, right? I would like to retain my right to consider them an enemy instead of a fellow human being. That is just our nature. We are expert, maybe more in our society than some, at the kind of destruction that doesn't require hitting, right? The kind of destruction that comes with words and assuming the worst of people and labeling them as utterly unacceptable in our company, and then becoming very shocked and surprised when actual real physical violence may result from that. As if these things aren't off, they're just neighbors, they're not far off, right? Loving our enemies, that's a lot more than just not hitting back. Praying for those who abuse you. Ooh. Now, it's important before we get any farther here to say this passage, and I have to say it every time it comes up, and we're going to have to say it for at least as many hundreds of years as it was misused, to say, turn the other cheek when you are in an abusive relationship. That is not what Jesus is talking about. Jesus is not saying here, go ahead and try to maintain affection for the person who is smacking you around. That is not what Jesus is saying. Jesus is not saying, stay and take it, forgive endlessly without ever asking for a change in behavior. That is not what Jesus is saying. This idea of praying for those who abuse you is, Jesus, you need to be in charge of him. Because if I'm in charge of him, it's not going to be good. You need to love her, Jesus, because I don't know how to love her. So that is praying for our enemies. It's not necessarily saying, please never, ever let them have even a hangnail. It's saying, God, you need to be in charge of this person. You need to love them. I know that love that you have for me. You need to take that for them as well. I need to know that I can't keep them in my hands, right? It's not gauzy sweetness or insincerity. Turning the other cheek, giving your shirt as well as your coat, this is probably civil disobedience. This is probably nonviolent resistance. So a Roman occupier walks by and backhands you because you are a nobody Palestinian in an occupied territory. Turn the other cheek. So they have to hit you forwards like an equal. Somebody in power comes and says, that coat looks nice, I'll take that, thank you. Take off your shirt too, and everybody starts looking at this idiot over here and why he's taking the shirt off people's backs, and suddenly it becomes very apparent what is going on. We think about the ways that we respond to violence that are not responding in kind. When I was in South Africa, there was a story about the terrible violence in Soweto Township, and every year there was an opportunity to remember that. And there was a time when those who did not live in the township wanted those who did, who felt lost and abandoned by a society that said they were nobody and promptly kicked them. Some of those who didn't live in the township said, how can we remember? Well, we will simply bring flowers. Well, no. We're going to, the apartheid regime says, no, you're not going to be allowed to drive in there. We're going to intercept vehicles with flowers. We are not going to allow flowers in. So finally, they find someone with a plane to drop the flowers to say, we remember. But what it does is it makes the power that is fighting about carnations look as ridiculous as it really is, right? Turning the other cheek is not about saying, yes, please do that some more. It's about saying, I'm not going to hit back. There is another way to change things. To be kind doesn't mean approve of everything that someone is doing, but to honestly seek their best interest. Seeking the best interest of everyone. Archbishop Tutu put it this way when he talked about South Africa, about his country and his community, and how there was a choice at the end of the official legal apartheid system. He said, there can be no future for us without forgiveness. There can be no future for us without forgiveness. And that was surely a theological opinion, but mostly it was a description of reality. If we respond in kind, there will be no end to the horror. Humans are so able to be horrible to one another that if we continue to give as good as we get, there won't be a future. And maybe you have experienced in your own heart this image that he used. He said, refusing to forgive, maybe more especially in interpersonal relationships, refusing to forgive, hanging on to hate is like me drinking rat poison and expecting you to die. That hate can do us no good. All it can do is shrivel us up. And yet, we think somehow we are punishing another with that. Forgiving is hard work. Bishop Tutu has a wonderful book that is the best I've read talking about forgiveness and really sort of walking through how it is that we get to forgiveness. It's not so hard to forgive. As Jesus said, we love those who love us. Someone who loves us has been cranky in the morning and they say they're sorry and we say, I forgive you. That's not hard. Sometimes it's not automatic, but it's not hard. But there are those hurts that are much more substantial and that take time. Joseph, we got sort of the very end of the story. There are years to Joseph's story, years and years, and we don't know how that movement happened, but I bet you it was not fast. I doubt that down in that pit where his brothers threw him, Joseph was thinking, someday I'm going to be able to help them. Oh, time and faithfulness and God working things that we thought were beyond hope into something else. So Bishop Tutu says there are 4 parts to forgiveness. There's telling the story. If you've heard about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, this was sort of the first 2 parts. Telling the story and naming the harm. If we pretend it didn't happen, that's not forgiveness, right? It's really important to tell the story and to be honest and thorough about what harm has actually been done. Because if we don't name the way that we've been harmed, our forgiveness isn't for that yet, and we're going to find out later on that we're still hanging on to it. Tell the story and name the harm. And it's not easy, right? Then the next piece is the difficult piece, the one that he says, now this may take you years. Forgiving, offering that forgiveness. So first you have to tell the truth. You have to name the harm. Like those of us in America, as we are dealing with our various histories of injustice, we'd like it to be over, right? Of course we would. It's hard work trying to fix this. It feels like we're never going to be done. But we have yet to finish telling the story. So when we thought we were done, well, we didn't tell the whole story. So there's no way we can be done with it. When we've done all of that, then maybe it becomes time for granting forgiveness. And that is something that just takes time. Saying, I give up my right to retaliate. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. Doesn't mean I loved it. Doesn't mean it's okay. Does not mean I say, great, do it again. It means I am not going to retaliate. I am not going to wish you harm. I want something different. And then the last one is renewing or releasing the relationship. Saying, now how do we be together again? How do we be again? What do we need in order to go forward? What has to change? What has to be different? Or releasing the relationship, because there are times where we don't have a partner in this process. It's just us doing our part of it. And then it's releasing, saying, I don't need to keep hanging on to this anger and this hate. I'm going to let you be in God's hands. This is hard stuff. This is hard stuff. Mercy is not a small word. It is hard. And God knows, right? God knows, because God has practiced loving God's enemies. God has practiced with you and with me and with all of us who get angry and throw blocks in God's direction, left, right, and center. who hear God's call for how we have been created to be, created for love and justice, and we say, that sounds like no fun, I want it to be all about me. Take your toys and go home. Again and again, we throw those blocks in God's direction, and God does not pick them up, does not throw them back, does not give as good as he has gotten. God knows that there is no way that chucking blocks at us is going to somehow generate mercy and compassion and a vision of God's kingdom in the world. The only way that can happen is for God to go first. That is Jesus. God goes first. God goes first in loving enemies like me and like you, loving enemies that are like this whole world full of those of us who would rather hit back than have peace, who would rather feel right than be kind. Jesus, walking his way to the cross, is turning the other cheek. And what that does is it shows us that our ways do not work, that none of this is creating justice. What we think is exacting punishment for crimes committed leads to the execution of an innocent man, and worse than that, killing love incarnate, God in the flesh with us. And yet he goes to do that because there is another way. And we can only see that when God goes first. When God says, oh, you want to give as good as you get? Well, get this. Let me give you something unbelievable. Let me show you what mercy looks like. I will give, and it will be a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, put in your lap. Makes me think about Adam once spent some time in Japan where you order a glass of sake, and I don't know if this is bizarre or usual, because that's what happens when you're a foreigner. Put the glass in a wooden box, and they start pouring, and they fill the glass. They keep pouring until the box is all full up. It's overflowed, and even the box is full. Are you supposed to drink it out of the box? We don't know. Overflowing so that it's into your lap. God, this is so much mercy. You've got it down my front. I'm covered. I don't know what to do with this. God says, yeah, give as good as you get. God goes first. We have a minute or two of silence usually after the sermon to let the Holy Spirit do her thing, to kind of pick away at our hearts and minds and find the places for God's word to not lodge and land. And if you are looking for something to do with your brain in those minutes or your eyes, our hymn 816, Come My Way, My Truth, My Light, is this invitation to God to show me that other way, to lean into this new way in the world, that God goes first. And God gives so that we can give as we have gotten. Thanks be to God.